Welcome everyone to our second webinar in a new series from Port Technology International. My name is Stephanie Morley and I'm the Director of Webinars and Conferences here at PTI. I'll be moderating today's webinar on Port-Centric Logistics, where we take a look at how it is being utilized and where. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today from the Port of Barcelona and DP World. Sadly, Abu Dhabi Ports has had to pull out at the last minute to deal with a logistics issue, so they will not be presenting today. Here at PTI, we have seen an increased interest in port-centric logistics as cargo owners and businesses look for ways to streamline supply chains. More ports and terminals are looking to accommodate this and in some cases, create additional revenue streams. What we have found is that port-centric logistics has different meanings to different people. And for this webinar, we have defined it to be used to describe logistics and distribution services based at the port where goods arrive. It is intended to be an alternative to inland depots and centrally located national distribution centers. In practice, PCL allows shipments to be stored at ports and therefore cut the number of handling stages throughout the supply chain. Now, before we begin, a few housekeeping items to mention. We will run both of the presentations and then go to the live Q&A session after the presentations are complete, with the aim to conclude at 3 p.m. British Summer Time. We are excited to make this as interactive as possible. So please do so as we go along. On the right of your screen, you will see a questions tab, and this is where you are able to submit them. We should have enough time for all of your questions, and we ask that you let us know if it's directed to any particular person. Lastly, this webinar will be made available for you and your colleagues to listen on demand from tomorrow onward. So feel free to share the link to those that may be interested. Now to our fantastic speakers. Right now, we will be hearing from Carlos Rua, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at the Port of Barcelona, who has adapted to these times by giving the first presentation on port-centric logistics, taking the necessary safety precautions with Gaudi's beautiful Sagrada Familia in the background.
When Port Technology asked me to participate in this webinar, I said, yes, of course. Port-centric logistics is an actual and interesting topic. But really, I was not sure about what to say, so the first thing I did was to try to ask an expert in this topic. Wikipedia, the greatest expert in everything, says that in the port-centric approach, the container is unloaded or stuffed at the port and its content is then transported inland, as an example, as a palletized freight. That's a great definition because this is what ports have been doing for thousands of years, moving Roman amphoras, bales, sacks, boxes. That's what we have been doing till the invention of the container. When containers appeared in the 50s, port logistics changed. Instead of moving the content, we decided that the best solution was to send all the box near to the final destination. We changed a port-based distribution by a box logistics. In fact, we invented pretty new words to explain the world the importance of moving all the box, intermodality, commodality. In 1992, we created our logistic activity area. We started with Thal Barcelona, and with the change of the century, we tripled our space in Thal Prat, and recently we have adquired some parcels out of the port area in Zona Franca. It seems that our Thal, our logistics activity area, is aligned with this concept of port-centric logistics. But in fact, when we developed the Thal, the idea was completely the opposite. The idea was to place logistic activities far away from the berth line. Before the development of the Thal, there were warehouses inside the container terminals in which activities like consolidation or disconsolidation of the containers were developed. With the Thal, those activities disappeared on the waterfront. After that, we started to construct a port network centered in the port and based it on inland terminals and rail connection from them to the port. In our case, the first investor was the Port Authority itself, with the development of our inland terminals in Zaragoza and Azuqueca, near Madrid. Then, our port terminals started to join us, developing rail services, investing in inland terminals, and becoming rail operators. This is our current port network: inland terminals, rail connections, motorways of the sea. And the idea behind all of this development is always the same: move the box, do not open it, do not desconsolidate it. In fact, containerization has brought a transformation of the shipping industry, and also it has influenced other transport modes. Concepts like enterprise deslocalization or globalization exist because containers have lowered transport cost. And always under the same premise: put the cargo inside the box and move the box till the end. But now it seems that to break a container at the port could be a better solution, because in that way you can reduce movements. You can avoid to go to a warehouse far from the city and then to come back later with some pallets from that container. So the question is, what's wrong with the box? Why are we thinking in changing the business model? Let's try to answer this question. First, traditional port operations are becoming a commodity. What does it mean? Well, there are many ports and many terminals in them. I'm sorry to say that, but for me all the terminals are quite similar, with similar cranes and similar land. There are port overcapacity in many regions, for example in the Mediterranean, and there are a huge pressure of shipping lines to reduce the cost of port operations. So for a shipping line it's quite easy to move from one port to another, mainly in transshipment. That's the definition of a commodity. Many port industry is endangered. I'm talking about the industry related to energy transition, like petrol or coal. It's a fact that some European refineries will close in the next 20-30 years. I'm talking also to the material transition affected by circular economy, and I'm talking also about the heavy industry, like cement, siderurgy. Most of this industry may move to other countries where cheapest energy cost and less environmental restrictions. Additionally, the pressure of the cities over the port activity is growing. Sometimes because we are competing for the same territory, sometimes because cities see us as a pollutant neighbor, sometimes because we have to recognize that port activity has no glamour for a city. If we put these three elements together, our business as a commodity, the possibility of empty spaces inside the port area, and the claim of the city for these spaces, and also for most sustainable activities inside the port, the only solution is to start new operations on these new areas. This slide tries to show which activities we think that will grow in a port area, which activities will be reduce their impact or their influence in the port area, and some activities that we are not sure about them. And they are uncertain because probably they will grow at world level, at a global level, but I'm not sure about what will happen at an European level. And yes, one of the expected growing activities is logistics. There are others like leisure, energy production, circular economy, but focusing on logistics, part of the new port areas will be dedicated to these logistic activities and will create added value for the traditional port operators. And yes, this evolution is what we can find under the concept of port-centric logistics. So probably port operations and also port authorities will have to move from our circle of comfort, loading and unloading containers, to added value activities over the cargo transported by those containers. We can extend the concept of port-centric logistics to terminal-centric logistics. In that way, not only ports but also inland terminals can develop added value activities linked to the cargo. Inland terminals are now focused on intermodal transport, rail to road and road to rail, and when there are inland navigation, we can add an additional transport mode. But like ports, in some areas you might start finding many terminals developing similar operations, moving containers in a cost-based competition. Value-added differentiation can be a plus for some of those terminals. We can also mix both concepts, the port network and the terminal-centric logistics. In that way, containers are sent from the port to the inland terminal and then staffed for the final delivery. The main difference between the existing model and this new approach is who controls the distribution chain. Port operators and shipping lines have started a vertical integration towards the land transport. They manage our services, they have logistic operators, they invest in inland terminals. This is an additional step to this direction, managing the deconsolidation of the container and the final delivery of the cargo. This graphic shows the current use of the land in the Port of Barcelona compared with the expectations in 2040. As you can see, nowadays, 2/3 of the land in the port is dedicated to cargo loading and unloading. This proportion will be reduced to 40% in the next 20 years. And logistics will be not the only one, but one of the winners for this space. Kind of logistic activities? Well, added value ones, a consolidation of disconsolidation of containers, postponement, customization, urban distribution. That's not really new. In the automotive industry, the terminals are performing this kind of activities, this kind of added value activities. So why not in the container industry? As a conclusion, what we can say is that ports has to focus on more added value activities, otherwise they will become a commodity. I think that where to do these activities is not the really important thing. You can do it inside the port, outside the port, near the port, behind the port. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that we are talking about port operators like port terminals trying to perform new added value activities out of their previous scope of action. So what we can see under the concept of port-centric logistics is a vertical integration of port operators, and that might include also the Port Authority itself. To finalize, in my opinion, the real objective of PCL concept is who controls the supply chain? One last thing, we are in a confinement. This is my evening walk with my son, and he is behind the camera. Please don't blame him if the image is not perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for that. Now, sorry, as a colleague of mine had pointed out, we never thought we would see someone present on the virtues of port-centric logistics in the shadow of Gaudi's cathedral. So I hope you also enjoyed the culture with his presentation. Now on to Dirk. We've got Dirk van den Bosch, who is the Regional Commercial Director for DP World Europe and Russia. He'll be talking us through the different international terminals around the world utilizing port-centric logistics.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Port Technology International webinar on port-centric logistics. My name is Dirk van den Bosch and I'm currently the Regional Commercial Director for DP World Europe and Russia. Without any further ado, let me jump straight into the presentation. I have divided the presentation in 3 parts. First, I will try to give a definition and some perspective of port logistics. Secondly, I will look at the drivers behind port-centric logistics, and particularly the drivers that actually are bringing port-centric logistics back in vogue. And to end, I will give you a few examples of successful implementation of port-centric logistics solutions. So, what is port-centric logistics? Don't expect from me an academic definition. I'll keep it simple. Port-centric logistics means different things for different people. But in general, it means that the cargo stays in the port and is there rehandled, undergoes some value add, is often stored and distributed from there to the stores and or the end customer. The port is thus at the center of the supply chain. It is not a new concept. Prior to containerization and to the development of the intermodal transport solutions, this is how cargo was handled and distributed. Gradually, the role of the port changed more into a connectivity node where containers pass through on their way to an inland destination. Although the port-centric logistics concept did never completely disappear from the ports and the terminals. But it is sure that lately the port-centric logistics concept has been gaining interest again. So let's now look at some of the drivers behind this renewed interest. I've grouped them as follows. First, there are the economic pressures. Secondly, we have the supply chain pressures. And third, we have the societal pressures. I will now discuss each group in more detail. So, the first on, we have the economical pressures. The cost of imbalanced flows. What do we mean by that? Import and export destinations are not the same. They're not in the same location. So they create empty repositioning and empty mileage. What do we mean by that? It is very seldom that you have your import industry and your export industry co-located together in the same geographical area. In many countries, it is actually very different where these both are located. And obviously, it does create quite a lot of empty mileage with containers, empty containers moving back and forth. Also, the deep sea flows and the intra-regional flows, also called the intra-European flows, are not balanced either. So you have locations where a full deep sea container arrives, and at the same time, an intra-regional container or an intra-European container is being positioned because that area is in deficit. So you have actually two containers going to the same location. They don't know from each other that they're going there, but one is going empty. What a saving would it be if you would be able to combine those? A second driver or an economic pressure is basically fuel cost. Fuel cost obviously is the result of the previous imbalance and the empty mileage that is being created by that. And we are now talking about serious amounts of empty mileage across the European continent and also in other locations around the globe. So the fuel cost bill is becoming quite important for a number of the customers. Another one is lack of truck drivers. I'm sure you're all aware of this problem and that this problem has been going on for a number of years. But it is clear that it is still an important problem and that it is actually on the increase. According to the IRU, the shortage is increasing and expected to reach about 36% in 2020. That is a serious impact. Secondly, we have road congestion. Everyone knows that. We face it nearly on a daily basis. And road congestion causes delays. It may result in the need for higher security stock levels. And it may also lead to lost sales due to an unavailability of the product. Let's now have a look at the supply chain pressures. The first one on is the reliability issues. You're all aware about the slow steaming. The shipping lines introduced slow steaming a number of years ago in order to actually defend themselves against another crisis, the financial crisis. At that time, that's when they came up with the idea to save bunker fuel to start slow steaming. Unfortunately, together with the slow steaming came also a period where we have seen a lack of schedule reliability. According to some analysts, the schedule reliability is at the moment at its lowest, and it's around 63, 65%, which is indeed quite concerning. Another point is the void sailings. Void sailings is another new step that shipping lines have taken in order to adjust their capacity supply with the demand cycle. But all that basically creates quite some reliability issues. And then at last, we still have basically delays on land caused by the road congestion, as we mentioned earlier. The second one is visibility issues. You may be surprised, but it is still difficult to see where the product is in the supply chain. Not always, but very often it is. And it's even more difficult to get early warnings about possible delays or disruption in the supply chain. These two factors, right, reliability issues and visibility issues, are drivers that negatively impact the customer experience and can lead to loss of sales. Then we have the digitization of the supply chain. It is an enabler to optimize the supply chain through data analytics and speed of data availability. So in my view, this is a positive one. This is one that actually will drive some change to the supply chain. And it will happen because we can do a lot more data analysis, and the speed with which we will be able to access and get the data available will basically increase enormously, or is already increasing enormously. So now let's have a look at the societal pressures. And in my view, these are going to be the most important ones we have to deal with in the near future. The first one is the green agenda. We're all very familiar with that. But in my view, it is quite clear that consumers and authorities will request a drastic reduction of the carbon footprint. I don't think they will accept that we continue the way we have been going. And obviously, this will require quite a rethink of the current distribution systems and networks. Another one is the change in customer requirements. The behavior of the customers is changing. You have heard about millennials, generation X and Z and Y. And as it happens, they demonstrate quite a different behavior than what we older generations used to display. We are in the era of instant fulfillment. We want overnight delivery of the goods we buy. We are in the era of e-commerce, and e-commerce basically allows us to go online whenever we want, check the availability of the product, and then buy it. But we don't accept that the product is not available. And if it is available and we buy it, we want to have it nearly instantly, within hours. And that leads to time compression for the companies to deliver and to get it to the customer. And it is directly linked to, of course, the customer experience. The third one is urbanization. And this may be a driver, or it may be an element that is not very often mentioned in relation to port-centric logistics, but it is important. By 2050, about 68% of the population will be living in urban centers. These megacities will be organized completely differently. They will be less dominated by cars and trucks, and urban logistics concepts are required. There's a lot of work being done at the moment to see how these urban logistics concepts can be set up. And the big question really is, how will we get the goods to the customers in those megacities? Because the current way of distribution and supply will basically not be sufficient and will not work in those mega cities. So this was a bit the overview of the drivers. Let's now have a look at some examples of successful implementations of port-centric logistics. And let me apologize first, but I'm of course biased because I work for DP World. Hence that my examples mainly come out of the DP World where I'm most familiar with. The first one, and certainly the most important one in my view also, is the Jebel Ali port and free zone. That's where all our port-centric logistic thinking in DP World has started and has been grown and has basically taken shape. Jebel Ali Free Zone is actually one of the largest logistics platforms in the world. It combines a seaport, logistic zones, and an airport. And all these are seamlessly connected, so cargo can move freely from one area to the other. Cargo is brought into the port, being de-event in the logistics zone. Value is added to the product, and then the product basically finds its way into the local market, or via trucks is distributed to the neighboring countries, or even through intra-regional carriers finds its way to the new markets. You have a picture here and you can clearly see how well integrated the operation is. And the black line is basically that seamless corridor that goes over the different zones. Another example, much closer home, is London Gateway Port and Park. And it sits in a very strategic location. It's about 28 miles from central London, one of the largest consumer areas in the UK. It is well connected to the highway system, and it is not far away from UK's Golden Triangle. It sits also very close to the Port of Tilbury. And why is that important? Port of Tilbury typically has a lot of these intra-European services coming. So here we go. We create an opportunity to combine your deep sea flows with your intra-European flows. It is an absolutely well-connected port and park with a lot of rail connectivity, both inside the UK, but also outside to the mainland in Europe. A perfect example, again, of port-centric logistics. In the park, we have a number of customers who basically already do value add on the cargo. So the box does not leave the port and the park anymore. We just internal shuttles bring the cargo, and then the cargo afterwards is distributed straight to the market. And the last one, but not the least, it's the DP World network on the Rhine. And I hear you purists say, well, this is not necessarily a real port-centric logistics setup. Well, I agree. Call it a hybrid for my part, but it certainly delivers very much similar benefits to the importers and the exporters as the pure port-centric logistics setup. In many of our terminals here, we basically serve importers and exporters who are very close by the terminal, where we pick up the goods and bring them back to the terminal, where we consolidate them and ship them through barges or rail onto the into the ports, the deep sea ports, where they can catch a ship either on a long haul or a short sea haul. In some of our terminals also, are we making use of existing transport capacity, and is a cargo brought to the terminal where it gets containerized, thus avoiding empty shuttles and empty repositioning. With this, I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and I would first like to thank you for your participation. I hope you found it interesting, and I want to leave you with a slide of the combined DP World, P&O Ferries Group, and Unifeeder Group's European network. And I'll let you dream of what port-centric logistics solutions are possible. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dirk and Carlos. That was a very, very interesting presentation with very diverse international case studies presented. So again, thank you. I'd now like to invite both of the speakers onto the stage so we can begin the question and answer part of the webinar. Hello, Dirk. Hi, Carlos.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you very much for joining us. Great. So we have a few questions here. Now, I guess with regards to COVID-19 and port-centric logistics, how do you see that the pandemic will affect how ports operate in the future? Will port-centric logistics make it easier or more difficult to achieve?
If you want, I can start with some comments about that. Of course, that the pandemic of coronavirus, of COVID-19, will affect a lot the logistic change, no? But the question is that nobody can say exactly in which way will be everything affected. There are some opinions on that. Companies will search for a more resilience related to the supply chain. So probably there will be diversification of entry points in their supply chains. They will put not all the apples in one box, so they will diversify their sources of prime materials and so on. They are searching for this kind of additional resilience. Some people also is talking about reindustrialization. I'm not very sure about that, but people is talking about shorter supply chains. Probably at the beginning, yes. I'm not sure if in a long-term perspective and if nothing happens in 2-3 years, we will become also with the long traditional logistics chains. But some people is talking about shortening the supply chains. And also, it's clear a new pressure from the urban environment against everything around them, no? Against port, against pollution, against everything, no? So if you combine these things, some of them press in favor of port-centric logistics, but some of them press against. For example, if you are talking about shorter supply chains, I mean, it's easy to talk about the port-centric logistics from cargo coming from China, because the container arrives from China to the port, and then you can develop the distribution in the port. But if you shorten the supply chain and the cargo comes from the same continent, from Europe or something like that, it has no sense, no? So if there are a lot of cargo doing this movement, then this is against, no? But also the pressure of the cities against the port is going in favor of this kind of new activities, because the cities will see some helpful developments, and now the ports are seen as maybe not the good guys, no, on these procedures, but doctors are the ones who everybody is clapping now. But then the logistic chains, the people that is giving the mask and so on, and bringing the food to the supermarket and so on, are the new idols, no, in some kind of perspective. So logistic is also something to take into account, and cities will press for a more advanced logistic, but focus on them, on the city. So you have a lot of possibilities to develop urban distribution from ports or from areas near the port or from logistic areas near the city. So this is something in favor, no? At the end, I don't know which one will win, no? I cannot say you.
I think just maybe a couple of points, and I mean, I largely agree with Carlos on that. But I think one point is important, right? I agree with him. We most likely will see some changes in the supply chain. There's going to be a need to make the supply chain more resilient. There's certainly going to be a demand to start diversifying the sources. Where am I sourcing from? So there is a big risk that actually you could increase the empty flow tremendously, which will then conflict immediately with the environmental pressures that I mentioned. Also, from the city side and the fact that more and more people will start living in cities, we see already now that COVID-19 has grown the need, and a lot of cities are in discussions on how do we now create in our cities more green environment, because we've seen that people get locked up in houses without gardens, and people say, well, that's not good enough. We need to basically bring more green back to the city. Well, that will obviously go at the expense of something, and it's very likely that will go at the expense of cars, trucks, and that is then where COVID will certainly sparkle, in my view, the development of new urban logistics concepts. And then you're back to the ports, like Carlos says, where, these containers, you're not going to bring them in the city anymore or close to the city anymore. They're going to stay in the port, and you're going to find new greener ways. I mean, like in London, they've been looking at barges, electrical vehicles that will do the small runs, even trains that have been used where certain parcels are put on the train and brought into the city. So there's a lot of thinking that's going on, and I think COVID will just be one of these catalysts in that process to push it forward.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, both of you had mentioned city congestion. How does Port-Centric Logistics put more pressure on cities with additional activity being created right alongside the port?
Well, I think just to what I said in the other question is, it goes hand in hand with the development of these new transport or ways of transport, right? For example, barges that are being used. I mean, we even looked from London Gateway, we looked at putting small electrical vehicles on a barge. The barge will actually go along the River Thames, stop at certain points which are there today, and then these vans will actually do the small deliveries with electrical vehicles. That's one thing. There is also, when you look at urban logistics, a lot of companies are actually experimenting and are coming in with very, very small size distribution centers from where basically an electric van would discharge some of the cargo there, and they would then deliver either by robots. We all know that robots are being tested, or people even by bike or whatever in that quarter in the city. So there's a lot of new thinking and a lot of new technologies that are available so that we don't have to put more pressure on the cities.
Great.
Yeah, I think that urban distribution is now, but it will be one of the hot topics for logistics in the next year, because the congestion, but also because the increase of e-commerce and some other elements that will make the urban logistic more and more complex. No? So in that way, port-centric logistics can help. Of course, if it's well designed and you have a platform inside the port or near the port to make this kind of distribution to help and so on. And as Dirk says, with electrical vehicles and with electrical, we don't have barges in Barcelona. I'm sorry to say that. But anyway, I think that it's a possibility, it's an opportunity for developing these activities from the port area, of course.
Great, excellent. So we have a question with regards to, it seems that return of port-centric logistics offers an advantage to ports with large estates or access to large off-dock storage areas and warehousing. What solutions are available to ports that do not have or have lost such assets in order to compete?
I think it becomes important that we start making a little bit differentiation between the terminals and the ports. I think Carlos in his presentation has actually indicated fairly well how port authorities are converting existing areas into areas that can be turned into logistics areas or areas that support the PCL concept. For terminals, obviously, it's a different thing. If you have a concession for a terminal with a very limited land behind it, well, you won't be able to build London Gateway. And that's something we, as DP World, very often see. Unfortunately, we do not always have concessions with a huge land bank behind it, like the port in the park in in London Gateway or in Jebel Ali and Caicedo and so on. If we had a choice, that would be our choice. That's how we would develop our terminals. But that's not always possible. But like I said, and I think Carlos probably can put a little bit more flavor to that, is the port authorities are certainly creating more and more space and taking older facilities and reconverting them into logistic spaces. And I agree with him. It is not so important whether your container just stays in the terminal and is being devented in the terminal, or whether he makes a very short trip to a little bit more in the hinterland, where basically he's being devented, and from there your Port-Centric Logistics distribution or handling starts. So that's not so important. The important is that the container does not go to an inland point and sits there and have to come back empty. Over to you, Carlos.
Yeah, I think that it depends a little bit on the port situation, because there are some ports that will have, I'm sorry to say for them, but they will have huge empty spaces in 10, 20 years, because there will be some heavy industry or refineries or this kind of big elements that will be out of the port. No, so some elements will disappear. Coal management, for example. In some that will let in some areas or in some port areas big empty spaces empty. You have to fill it because you are competing. Those spaces are competing with the city. So if you want to maintain it as a port environment, you need to do some activities in order to help the city behind the port. That's the only solution, because if not, there will be housing, there will be another kind of activities, probably more out of the port business. So I think this is the first element, no? And it depends on the port if you have a lot of space or not. If you have a lot of space, then you have a lot of possibilities to dedicate this space to logistic or to new logistic activities. No. In some other ports, there will be empty space, but probably less. Maybe this is the case of Barcelona. Okay, we consider that we will have more space dedicated to logistics, but probably we do not have a heavy industry that will disappear in the next year. So our space is our space. Well, there will be something more, but not a lot. No. So, but the question is that first, we are talking about vertical integration. So, I mean, as Dirk has said, the terminal has a limited space. So maybe they don't have this area for doing this kind of new activities, but they can find another parcel out of the port 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers far away and perform this kind of activities there, because they are also developing this vertical integration in rail services or in inland terminals on somewhere in other side. So they have to analyze the business model and to try to do out of the port. And from the Port Authority point of view, what we have to do is analyze if these activities are profitable for the society, because the port is a port authority or the port itself is not here to earn money, it's here to help the society, to help import, to help export, to help the companies that works in the international commerce. No? It's not the same case that the terminal operators, because we are public authorities. But in our case, if this is profitable for the society, we have to find the way to deliver this space for doing these activities. Okay, so that's the question. In some cases, it will be easier. As I said, if in some ports it will be not so easy. But if this is the future, we have to go in that direction and find the space, maybe in the port or maybe out of the port. But land investments are necessary in that case.
Great. We have a question from the audience, which probably ties in quite nicely right now. So what do you believe is the role of the government to promote and implement port-centric logistics now and in the future?
Okay, as I said, as a port authority, we are a state company. Okay, so we are the government in some kind of and my opinion is that we have to find a way to help private operators to do this kind of operations. when 20 years ago, when we started developing our port network, we started investing in land out of the port as a port authority. No, we are the owners of or shareholders of the land in some inland terminals, but then private operators are operating these terminals. This can be also a model for port-centric logistics for the authorities. If they consider that this is a good investment, can invest in this kind of area. But not only port authorities. City halls can do the same, can dedicate some areas for this port-centric logistics to develop urban distribution areas or urban platforms for developing this kind of activities related to the urban distribution. And maybe port terminals can be the operators of the urban distribution platforms. Why not? So the question is to see some synergies between the different actors, port authorities, port terminals, maybe logistic operators, maybe the city hall with some areas that want to dedicate to logistics and so on, and find the different elements to join to make a proposal, a value proposal.
Great.
Well, I think like in any of those things which concern infrastructure, I think, yeah, there is a role for the governments, but I think that governments also will reflect and listen to what their voters say, right? And I think, just referring to what I mentioned on the societal pressures, I'm sure that more and more people are opposed to sit in these heavily congested roads, trying to get to work. We've now seen that obviously with COVID-19 we can get around that. But we've also seen that actually the lockdown in most of the countries contributed to an absolutely better quality of air that was in the cities. So all these things will not have gone unnoticed. And I'm sure governments will actually actively work on trying to find different solutions and that will all drive more and more into the port-centric logistics. And it will probably be brought forward specifically by port authorities and city administrations, because of course that's where the impact is mostly felt.
Great, excellent. So we have a comment and question from Eduardo Calderon from Cowie. He says, thanks for these fantastic presentations. So well done, gentlemen. And as leaders in the industry, do you see a globalized effort to develop future port planning? Or do you think that there are individual uncoordinated developments?
Whew, that's a hefty one. How to answer that one? I mean, I think port planning. I mean, there is not something like one blueprint that is being used as far as I know. I mean, at least I've not come across that. And I think development of ports globally very much takes place, is driven by the governments and the local economies. And very often it is state or government authorities who basically, or either the port authorities, who very often then also belong to the state in certain parts of the world, who are then trying to fend off these concessions. It will very much depend on which part of the world you're talking to. But it may still be linked to port-centric logistics. For example, if you look at Africa, one of the big points is, I mean, Africa still, they have quite some ports. But what is the challenge in Africa? How do I get the goods into the port? And how do I get the container to the inland? So there, port-centric logistics is almost a given. And port authorities and governments, when they actually go and give these concessions with planning, will actually think a lot more about that connectivity and the ability of creating port-centric logistic solutions in the back of their ports to support the fact that actually the products and the produce, which is very often inland, can actually make it to the port in a decent state. In other locations, that pressure might not be there. So I don't think it's you can just answer with there's no one answer to that solution.
Sure.
I think it is very much going to be what is happening in that country, where's the state of the economy, and what are the needs for the cargo flows.
Excellent. Carlos, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Dirk. It's not the same in every port, and it's not the same in every country, and it's not the same in every continent. In fact, no? The development in Africa, as he has said, is not the same than in Europe. Focusing in Europe, I think that during the last years or the last decades, there has been a strong port competition between different ports, and all ports were trying to grow more than the port behind us, no, or the other ports. And that has generated an overcapacity in many regions, no. So now we have a lot of terminals that are not empty, but well, 60% capacity, 50% capacity, or something like that. No? That means that we have this overcapacity. Maybe 10 years ago was not a question because everybody wants to grow and it was a fantastic period and so on. But now we are in the middle of a crisis. We have to be careful about our investments. And I think that capacity is not the key question. The question is the flexibility or the capacity to give added value to the final customer or to the society or to the city and so on. So in this new approach, Port-Centric Logistics has a sense, okay? And we have to flexibilize our terminals, our port structure, and focus in flexibility, in reliability, in added value activities more than in our capacity. I think that in Europe, maybe someone will kill me for saying that, but I think that we have enough capacity. Maybe not the suitable capacity, maybe not the suitable one, no? But I think that we have enough terminals, enough surface, enough intermodal terminals or inland terminals and so on. Probably not the required one, no? I have a terminal, but this is not the suitable one. Okay, we have to make some improvements, no? Or to change something in some way. But in a general point of view, we have everything, okay? So it's not a question of an enlargement of trying to do more things, but it's a question to know what we really have and to focus on these added value activities. And here I think that Port-Centric Logistics has a lot of say because this is an added value activity, okay? So, and this is the situation more or less in Europe, trying to answer that. So yes, the ports has to focus on that. We have to think on that, but not only Port-Centric Logistics. I mean, there are more additional added value activities that we can do as a port and that we can provide to the society. No? So this is one of different elements, no? Innovation, business generation, energy transition. Ports are a place where you can develop energy to create energy, no, by windmills or by solar panels or something like that. So there are many business opportunities related to ports that now with the crisis situation, we have to invest on that more than into increased capacity because it takes to nowhere that thing.
Great. So I think we have time for just a couple more questions. There's one with regards to 3PL, warehousing and distribution. And this question is the idea of having a 3PL valid when talking about PCLs, Port-Centric Logistics? Is that...
I've talked about some kind of synergies. So I think that at the end, the answer is that we have to find some alliances between 3PL, probably port operators or port development and so on. Port terminals has entered in some business in the last years, like rail operations or inland terminals. No, so how? Sometimes they have developed their own company. Sometimes they have make some acquisitions, may have some alliances and so on. So I think that there are many ways of developing that, but there has to be some kind of relationship between 3PL, port operators, sometimes port authorities, and sometimes the different agents of the supply chain. I mean, at the end, we are talking about a supply chain. We have to deliver the product to the the end customer. So all the elements has to be aligned in order to do that. No, so how, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there is
I don't think it's de facto said that it has to be the port order terminal basically who does that port-centric logistics. I mean, I would rather say you have to start from the end customer, right? What works for them? Mm-hmm. How do they want to develop the port-centric logistics? What is key is that when they want to build up or implement the port-centric logistics, is that they even if they use the 3PL, that 3PL then basically takes facilities which are in the vicinity, very close to the terminals, the ports where the containers come in, so that we don't start taking these boxes out again over a long haul into a warehouse somewhere in the hinterland, and then basically create again a flow. So, like for example, in Jebel Ali, London Gateway, you will find 3PLs who basically perform port-centric logistics. But if you as a customer would like us as DP World to do that, well, in some places, not everywhere, but in some places we can actually do that, and we will do that. But to me, it's not a question either or. I mean, both work. It's just a new thinking. It's a new way of looking on how do I set up the supply chain, and certainly the last mile or the first mile.
Excellent. Because we're Port Technology International, I think we need to address a particular question on technology. We have a question with regards to how IoT, drones, and some other technologies could help port-centric logistics. Now, this to me, if you guys could, just provide some initial thoughts, this seems to me to be a much greater issue where we could probably talk about the warehouse and distribution technologies that are involved. So something to consider going forward. But if you could just, I guess, kind of briefly mention how IoT and drones and some other technologies are assisting with PCL, that would be great.
Well, I think if I start, the PCL actually will be extremely aided by having all the benefits of these technologies. Actually, probably would not really work very well without. Because we touched upon, I mean, if you look at the urban logistics, I mean, it's clear that over time your drones will play a role in it. Drones today already play a role in certain terminal operations, right? I mean, you basically have keeping an eye on what's moving, what's going on. IoT, obviously, visibility is one of the elements that I raised. We all think and live in a world that track and trace, that's it. But today, a container arrives in a port, and if only a few people know what's actually in there, in that container, and it very often happens that it comes into the factory, and then people start querying and finding, and then there is a packing list somewhere. It's not. I mean, it sounds like it's not happening and it's old stuff. No, it's still happening today. So also information about possible disruptions. It's still rare to have that well in time, so you can actually act upon that information. But like you say, I mean, this could probably be a whole webinar with more. I mean, people who are more specialized in this. But I think we only start to uncover what is possible, and certainly, I mean, I'm not an expert on AI, but I can see AI playing an enormous role going forward in both terminal operations, but also in the supply chain.
Great.
I think that there are two technological elements that, in my opinion, are quite important to develop port-centric logistics. No, the first one is automatization, the warehouse automatization. But at the end, what we are talking about is to put a container, to open the container, to take out all the pallets, to make some kind of sorting, picking, preparation of the cargo, cross-docking, and put in another truck or in another furgo or an electric vehicle and send to the city and make the distribution and so on. No? So this is a key element for automatization. I mean, most of these activities can be automatized, and that means a cost reduction and a better way of developing all of this. No, we have automatized platforms in order to do that, and they are existing now. No, but if you are focusing on port-centric logistics, you will have to bring this kind of automatized platforms to the port. The second key element, in my opinion, is information. The information transfer between the different agents in the logistic chains, because this has improved a lot. For example, in ports with PCS, with port community systems and these kind of things, and everybody in the port knows more or less the information they need and so on. But if you are going far away in the logistics chain, I mean, you are responsible also for distribution, you are responsible also for the final delivery and so on. You need additional information in order to do that. So you have to get more integrated information about the goods in the container zone in order to perform this kind of operation, and also a new information coming from the city, the traffic situation, the environmental situation, what's happening with congestion and so on, in order to really take profit of these new activities. No, so those are the both, I think, key elements for that. Warehouse automatization in order to do in a cheaper and best way the operations in the container, and information in order to reach the final delivery to the client. Other things like drones, okay, you can use it, but I think it's not the key element in this case. No.
Great. Excellent. So we have come to the conclusion of this webinar, and I would really like to thank both of you, Carlos and Dirk, for your time and fantastic information presented. And thank you to all who have listened and participated today. Just so you know, our next webinar on end-to-end supply chain, the real value of port digitalization, will be presented next Wednesday, May 27th at 2 p.m. British Summer Time. Thank you very much. Be well and keep safe. Take care.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.